Hello everybody, I'm joined by my good friend Will Terrell. He is a comic book artist. He's been doing it for many years. Really good guy. Overall, got pretty good laugh. Ha ha ha. But anyway, hi Will. Thanks so much for joining me today for this interview. As I said, Will is a comic book artist and a cartoonist and a husband too. Uh,
He's here somewhere.
he has an invisible wife. Well, no.
He's
Okay.
visible to me. That's all that matters.
No, but hi.
Hey, how's it
Welcome.
going?
It's going good. Um,
Thanks
so,
for having me on.
you're welcome.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the reasons I wanted to interview you is just because I'm such a huge fan of your stuff.
Oh,
When I saw your YouTube channel, it was one of those channels that it's like, why haven't I seen this before? There was, I think it was Thad Taylor. He
uh-huh.
he, he
Yeah.
might have featured you, and so that was awesome seeing your work. How did you get started? Maybe we could start from the beginning. Where were you born? And how did you first encounter art in your life?
Oh, wow. I was born in Texas, Austin, Texas. And I've lived here most of my life, but I mean, I moved around a lot. Like, I lived in Colorado for a while, lots of places in Texas. Lived in California for a while. And I basically, I mean, I was always an artist when I was a kid, but I was never that great of an artist. But I really latched onto it and latched onto storytelling because it was the only thing I could take with me everywhere. You
Hmm.
know, anytime I moved to a new place, I could bring my sketchbook with me, or I could bring my stories. And anytime I'd have to start over at a new school and have to start over making friends, I could just make up stories about everything going right,
Right.
especially when things went wrong. So that I didn't know that you could actually do art or storytelling for a living. And so when I found out, in like just before graduating high school, that you could do it for a living, or that I met people that were talking about doing it for a living, it kind of blew my mind because I'd always done that, and it never even occurred to me that I could do it as a job.
When did that happen? When did you learn that? Because I remember the same experience for myself, and it was yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know why it never really occurred to me before. Because I collected like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when it came out, and when the Image comic books came out, I got the very first Youngblood and Spawn and all those. I don't know why it didn't occur to me then that I could be an artist, but I guess mainly because um, I was never the artist that people responded to. Like I I draw with friends at school, and kind of people would pass mine off like, oh, that's all right, And the guys sitting next to me, they're like, oh, that's awesome, and they were always excited about their work, and so I always saw myself more as a writer, and never even considered art for a living. And it wasn't until after high school, a friend of mine had asked me to write a story for him to draw, and he just never got around to drawing it because artists in general are flaky, and so I decided to just draw it myself, and that was really the starting point of my career. I fell in love with telling my own stories, and sorry, I had the air conditioner going. Uh, yeah, I fell in love with telling my own stories, and I decided that if it took me 10, 15 years to actually learn how to draw well, that I might as well start now. I don't know why I had that long-term vision, but I figured if it took 10 years to become a doctor or a lawyer, you know, I might as well do something I'm really passionate about. And that was the only thing I felt like I was good at was writing.
Huh.
I don't know why it never occurred to me to do anything else.
That's that's really inspirational. That I don't know. How did you figure that out? That it was akin to something like being a doctor. That yes, you just have to put in the time.
Um, I don't. I guess I started looking into becoming an architect. Uh, I was like, if what are the different options of being an artist? And I talked to a couple people that actually did architecture for a living, and they all said it was 7 years in school and then interning, and it'll be 10 years before you're really making money with it. And that's what got my mind thinking along those lines. Um, but yeah, and same thing with doctors. I knew it always took a long time to become a doctor.
Hmm.
I didn't know how much money you could make as an artist, and I'm not rolling in cash or anything, but I do what I love.
Yeah. Okay, so you have this idea now. Okay, you're going to be an artist, and it's
Mhm.
going to take a while. So could you walk through the steps then that took you from there to here?
Uh, well, I I wrote my first story, and like I said, my friend, I tried to get him to draw it, and he he was like, I don't know how to do backgrounds, and so I was like, well, I'll just draw the backgrounds myself. And then he said, I don't know how to ink, and so I was like, well, I'll just ink it myself. And then within a few pages, I was like, I'm just doing it all myself, so might as well just do the rest of it. And so I think on that story, I only did maybe 6 or 7 pages, and then my sociology professor at Texas Tech, where I was going, was Young Mei Tsai, and he was Francis Tsai's father.
Ah.
Francis Tsai is this amazing, you know, concept designer and comic book artist and illustrator. And he's like, my son Francis, he draws. Would you like me to introduce you to him? And I was like, uh, sure. I had no idea who he was talking about. And he just showed me. He brought back this pile of drawings that Francis had done. It blew my mind. I mean, even back then, like in college, Francis was amazing. And he's older. He's like 10 years older than me. And so I started talking to him, and we both found out we had the same love for Appleseed and Masamune Shirow, Ghost in the Shell. And so I started writing a story for him, and he did like the first version of that. It was like a 16-page story, and I printed it up and took it to a small convention in San Antonio. And everywhere I went, I got the same like critique from people. They're like, "So you didn't draw this?" And I was like,
Hmm.
no, I didn't. I wrote it. I created it. I paid for it. And they're like, but you didn't draw it. And that was such a frustrating experience to me that I decided that I was going to start drawing my own stories. I'm going to keep writing for other people, but I'm going to start drawing my own stories. And so we left that convention, and I started working on this other series called Dark Ages. And I wrote another story for Francis to draw, and we decided to put them together as a flip book, where it was half one story on one side and
Right.
half my story on the other side. And I spent like $1,000 printing it up, and we took it to San Diego Comic Con in 1997. And couldn't basically I couldn't sell it. We didn't have a table, and I found out pretty quickly I couldn't even give it away. Like they
Really?
loved Francis's artwork, but they didn't like my artwork at all, and it
Oh.
was it was very embarrassing because everyone I'd show it to they'd look at my stuff and they just like cringe, like, ooh, this is bad. I have to be honest, you should be an accountant, you should be anything but artist. I was like, what? And then they'd flip it over and they'd see Francis like, whoa, this is amazing. Whoa, did you do this? And I'm like, no, I did not do this.
That's the other guy.
That's the other guy who would go on to do amazing things with his career. I learned very early on to confront my own ego. It was, very challenging. But I got good critiques that first year from a few artists, and then most of them were just like, "You are in for a decade of heartache if you keep trying to draw."
Really? Wow.
They were very discouraging. If anybody wants to see pages from that book. It's on my website, willterrell.com, and I put the PDF like up maybe a month or two ago. So it's kind of old, and I mean, you can see potential in it, but the inks are really bad. There's terrible anatomy. Like one of the main characters, she looks like a blow-up sex doll. Like it's just she's all like a fish. Like it, I didn't know anatomy at all. But most of everybody I showed it to they'd give me a little bit of feedback, like you need to start working on anatomy, you need to start working on perspective. And then this one artist showed me, his paintings. Like he had these gorgeous like Frank Frazetta type paintings. And I admired his work for a while, and then he like reached behind and he pulled out this other painting that was terrible. Like it looked like a 5-year-old drew it. And he says, "I drew that 5 years ago." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, if you go to school or you study, you practice, you'll get good at it eventually. You just got to put in a lot of hours, a lot of mileage, and keep trying." And that gave me courage to keep going with it.
Yeah. Wow. So, yeah, because I was gonna actually ask, like, how did you not give up and just quit after hearing all that?
I was just stubborn. I mean, I didn't have anything else.
Yeah.
I was terrible at math, and I was, not great at pretty much anything else. I didn't want to work at McDonald's for my life. Not that I ever worked at McDonald's, but I just didn't see any other option. Like, I wanted to be a storyteller, and I wanted to be an artist, and I figured I'd get there eventually. I mean, even if I was, I'm still, like, I feel like I can be a much better artist now. Like, 5, 10, 15 years from now, I feel like that's when I'll be the artist that I want to be. Where now I'm content with a lot of my drawings, but I still have a lot of room for growth, especially where it comes to storytelling. Like telling stories that really suck people in and then leave a mark on them. Right. They read it and it changes them having read it. But that's the kind of stories I want to tell eventually.
Cool. So after you got that critique, though, did you end up going to any art school, or?
It took a while. It was right after that I enrolled at Texas Tech, and I started taking their figure drawing class. But it wasn't, especially, this was 15 years ago, they didn't like comic books at all. Mm-hmm. And they really didn't like illustration. They didn't like people to do linear art, where you just draw with lines. I don't know. Delineation, that's what it is. And so anytime I try and draw in that style, they would slap me on the wrist, like, no, draw with scribbles, or draw with soap on tar paper. It was just weird. It was one of those artsy fartsy schools, and so I felt like I didn't belong there. I think it was a good school for a lot of other artists, but not for doing illustration or comic books or anything figurative. And so it was pretty frustrating. My main education for the first 7 years I was a comic book artist was going to conventions and getting critiques from artists. And that helped, but it was a very slow progress, because I would build a portfolio for 6 months, and I'd go to 2 or 3 conventions and just get reamed and have to go home and unlearn everything that I taught myself that last 6 months and have to start all over again. And eventually I ended up going to the Jeff Watts Atelier in San Diego, where Michael Turner went there, and Joe Chiodo taught there for a while, and there's a lot of good artists that have come out of that school. And Ron Lemon, he was one of the instructors there, and Proco, he's one of the instructors there. It was a pretty amazing school. I mean, they're the best in the world out of that area.
Right. Wow, so how long were you there?
It was 8 months. It was just like 2 semesters. And I learned more in those 2 semesters than I did, in the 10 years before that. And this was in 2005. And I want to go back. I'm back in Texas now, and it's kind of frustrating. Like there's not a lot of it's not the same kind of environment. I'll say that. Like out there, just being because I was working at SeaWorld in San Diego, and then going to this art school, the Jeff Watts School, and then in the evenings, all these caricature artists would get together, like Steve Silver and Court Jones and Steve Fishwick, and and they'd have like Kage from Japan. He's like a famous caricature artist over there. He would come into town and come draw with us. And anytime somebody was in town, they would come draw with us, and I learned so much just by observing these guys interact with each other and how they would fill up an entire sketchbook. And so between that and then school and then drawing, I was drawing like 12 hours a day, and I was loving every minute of it. So when I left there, I kind of took that attitude with me when I came back to Texas, and I started. I spent 6 years starting an artist community here in Texas called the Lubbock Sketch Club, and I worked with probably 200-300 artists over that 6 years, teaching them the way that I was taught in San Diego, trying to pass it on.
So that's all the caricature side of it. Because you started out in comics, and then was it San Diego that turned you onto caricature?
No, I actually, when I did my after that whole time with Francis, I started doing like mini comics because it was a lot cheaper to learn that way. I got a job at Kinko's where I got basically got free printing because I did all my own printing. And I would go to these arts and crafts fairs, and I'd sell these mini comics for like $1 a piece. So I figured, if I can't sell these for $1, there's no way I could sell these for like $3 or $5. And it's better than spending $1,000 printing something I can't even give away. And so I started going to these arts and crafts fairs, and these little ladies would be like, "Oh, I'm not interested in comics, but can you draw my kid like Spider-Man?" And I was like, "Sure." And then I'd make like $100 in a couple hours doing caricatures, and I'd never even heard of caricatures. I was calling them comicatures. I was like, this is comicatures. Nobody's ever thought of this. I'll draw a kid as Spider-Man, and I'll make their head big. So I made more money with that. That became sort of my day job for a long time. I would go to flea markets and county fairs, and eventually I started doing it at like restaurants, just working on tips, and I got pretty good at it. And then that was another because I went out to Comic-Con in like I think it was 2004, and I met Court Jones, who's like a world famous caricature artist, and he actually won the Golden Nosy that year, which is the big award for caricatures.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Come out to San Diego and you crash on my couch until you find a place." And I come out to the school, and he was teaching caricature class there, and it was pretty amazing. And that's really when I started like taking it to another level with the caricature stuff. I've had a very like ambiguous career, just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, because the Jeff Watts thing, that's like fine art almost, right?
Yeah.
So
And I needed that to develop my figurative art more for doing comic books, and that helped a lot. And in fact, when I came back, I started a figure drawing group here, and originally it was just in my house, and I'd have random strangers and naked women at my house, and we'd all just draw people, and then with the sketch club that developed into, we had our own studio for a while, and then somebody else took over, and that group, it's actually like 3 groups now. It's like split up. It's gotten so big. But everything I learned in San Diego, I brought back and kind of set up here. Because the way I looked at it was, I was frustrated that there weren't more resources in Lubbock, Texas, where I live. But I decided there's not that many resources because nobody's decided to put them here.
Right.
And what would happen if I saw this as an opportunity to create something? And so I did, and it made a huge impact. Like, it's helped. Basically, everything I do with the videos is stuff that I've taught people for the last 7 years. It's just the last 7 years it was like one-on-one. You know, we'd meet every week, and I'd work with 30, 40 artists each week, and some of them would be like kids that are like 7 years old, doing their first drawing, and some people were 77 years old who've been filling sketchbooks for their whole lives that didn't know what to do with it. And then all the people in between, you know, the high school kids, the college kids, the guys my age that are kind of lost and don't know what to do with their careers. So I've worked with people, that whole spectrum, on you know, and just encouraging them and helping them just fall in love with drawing again and create a vision for themselves down the road. And that's something I got from Jeff Watts and from Steve Silver, from being around those guys, is that's just who they are. Like, they just constantly encouraging people, and I was like, I can do that. You know, it's not that hard to encourage people, and it makes your life better. It makes you more fulfilled, you know, and I don't know.
So then, is that what led you to doing the YouTube videos then? How did that start?
Yeah, well, because I'd been doing, like with the Sketch Club, one thing I learned was that every 6 months it was a different group of artists, and so it kind of felt like I was teaching the same lessons over and over, just in different ways. And so I decided it would be better use of my time to just put that message into videos and let it go out there and reach more people. It seems that people are responding to it. I get emails every day, and it's humbling. Like, it's helping people, I think.
It's definitely. I mean, from my perspective, it's helping me a lot.
Has it really?
Yeah, totally. Because when I draw, I get tunnel vision, and I do this thing where I think, okay, I have to draw a pose, and then, okay, let's make it contrapposto, let's make it this, let's make it that, and I completely forget things like story. Like, what is this person doing? And I get caught up in anatomy and proportion and exaggeration and design and everything, but it's almost purposeless in a way. And then you made one video and you were talking about story, and it just hit me, and it's like, yeah, that's what I'm missing. That's what I'm missing. So
it's weird how you can just miss the basics. You're like, huh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, my person should be doing something, and not just standing with shoulders and hips twisted in opposition. Yeah.
Well, that's cool, man. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you helped a lot of people, and I think, you know, you're gonna help way more people too. So, so I also saw your online comic. How did that come about?
The Superzeros?
Yeah.
I got the idea for it when I was living in San Diego. It's sort of a writing exercise. I started writing it just to start writing, because I did that first comic for Francis, and then I wrote about 5 or 6 books after that, and then it did wear down on me how many bad critiques I got on my artwork. It finally affected me. It made me stop writing, which is the thing. That's the reason I started, was to write. It's kind of like you're talking about doing all this stuff with your sketches, and then you forget to tell a story with it.
Right.
That happened to me for like 10 years, where I stopped writing, and I became obsessed with the idea of becoming a professional artist and getting my skill levels to a certain point where people would actually pay me to draw, and, you know, not critique my drawings constantly. And I sort of lost perspective of why I was doing it to begin with. And then when I finally started writing again, I realized, oh, I don't really know how to write. I know how to develop characters, and I know how to develop interesting plot points, but I don't actually know how to write so that people want to read it. And so with Superzeros, it was like, I'm just going to start, and I'm going to make my mistakes and learn as I go, and hopefully it'll go somewhere. And I finally got to a point where the story it was making people laugh, and they were coming back and reading it every single day. But then I finally realized what it was that I was frustrated about, and it was I didn't know what the story was about. there was no point to the story. It was just kind of a vehicle for me to tell jokes. Um, and so I stepped back and I started reading books like Brian McDonald's Invisible Ink, which is an amazing book on writing. I highly recommend it to anybody. And then Save the Cat, which is a good book. And then I've been taking storyboard classes too from Rad Seacrest, who's like a DreamWorks storyboard artist. And all these things have taught me how to craft a story so that it's engaging to its audience. It's not just something, it's not just popcorn that you pop in your mouth. You know, it's something like you really, it's a meal you sit down and you enjoy it, you savor it. And so I'm learning how to actually craft a story that way now. And so when I go back to doing Super Zeros, it will have that behind it instead of just being kind of a wandering gag machine. That makes sense.
So did you ever consider animation then?
Yeah, that's actually right now my wife and I are both taking storyboard classes to get into the animation industry. And I've done a few tests for Nickelodeon, and I don't know. That's one of my goals is to get into storyboarding. Going back to figuring out why we do this, you know, since I lost perspective on why I was an artist to begin with, and the only reason I was an artist was to tell stories, I had to really like figure out why that was important to me, so that I can. It's loosened me up in a lot of ways. Now I can say I can be a caricature artist as long as I tell stories. I can be an illustrator as long as I tell stories. I can be a comic book artist as long as I tell stories. And I can be a storyboard artist as long as I tell stories. All these things, it's okay for me to go in those directions as long as it's making me a better storyteller for the stories I'm going to be telling in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And that was a very big missing ingredient for me for all these years, and I was kind of wandering all over the place. I was doing caricatures just to make money and pay the bills, and that's not enough. You know, it's not moving you forward in your career. It might be developing your skills somewhat, but it's not getting you to where you want to be down the road. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to get back to figuring out what my purpose for doing this was, and now that I know it, I can become a storyboard artist and not feel bad about it, and not feel lost about it. And I can keep doing comic books, but I don't have to take contracts just to pay the bills anymore.
Right.
I can take a contract if I can use it to develop that goal for 5, 10 years from now of being a better storyteller.
That's amazing. So, do you have plans of creating your own IP again, like with the Super Zeros thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Super Zeros is one of them. I'm going to go back to, I've got an idea brewing, and it'll be like a full graphic novel, and I'll probably do it as a webcomic again, but also as a graphic novel simultaneously. Because I'd never done webcomics before, and I didn't really know what I was getting into. And one thing I found that I was frustrated with was writing as I went, and that's a bad way to do it, because I would get 6 months into it and realize, oh, I really wanted to go this way with the story, but I wrote this thing 6 months ago that people still talk about, and I can't change it because of this, and you know, and that's part of the problem with I didn't know what the story was about, and I didn't know where I was going. So yeah, that's in fact the comic book I'm working on now, Owls of the Ironwork Isle, is a creator-owned. I created it with a friend of mine who we both wrote it together, and he does the scripting and I do the comic book, the artwork on it. But we plotted it out together and stuff.
Awesome. So I think that's nearing the end. Do you have any advice that you would give to aspiring artists? I almost feel like you are the answer to so many questions I get asked, because I get so many questions from people who say, I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm not in an art. I'm not in New York. I'm not in LA. And what do I do? And it seems like your answer was create your own community.
Yeah.
And yeah, and other people who say I'm not talented, or you know, is it just hard work? And it seems, yeah.
I think that the root to all of that is if you have an excuse that's holding you back, that excuse is the answer to that excuse is your opportunity you're looking for. Does that make sense? So it's like if your excuse is I don't have any artists to draw with, that's what's holding me back. Then you need to go find artists to draw with. You need to create that opportunity for other people to come draw with you. Or if your excuse is that you don't have, you're not in New York or you're not in LA, how do you turn that into an opportunity? And it's weird. The thing that we latch onto is the thing that's holding us back. So if you've got this excuse that you keep going back on, that's the thing you need to work on inside of you. And if you don't work on that, you're just going to keep being held back. I think that's the way that this world works. Is like, if there's something you need to work on and you are ignoring it, the universe is just going to provide more opportunities for you to have to work on it until you finally do something about it.
Right. Wow.
I learned that the hard way, because I'm stubborn as a mule, and I would just keep butting my head against stuff and until I realize, oh, I guess the only common denominator in all of these problems is me. And until I change me, none of these things can change. If that makes sense.
Wise words. All right. Well, okay, I want to ask one more question. What's it like being married to a cartoonist? Because your wife is a cartoonist. Is that just like you spend all day watching cartoons and like drawing together? Because it sounds awesome.
She's pretty amazing. She's absolutely amazing. And she's actually funnier than I am. And she's more into cartoons than I am. I'm way too serious. I've always been way too serious, and I'm thankful for her because she lightens me up. But yeah, we go on sketch dates, and we just sketch, and that's how we met. Was at the sketch club. I started that group when I came back from California. Part of the reason I came back from California is I was kind of lonely, and my family's all here, and so I came back here. I didn't know it, but I was going to meet my wife, who's absolutely amazing. Yeah. I can't wait for us to get out to. Our plan is to go out to California and work at Disney or Nickelodeon or something, and however long it takes to get the skills that we need for them to hire us. We're willing to put in the time. But I've been out there a few times and drawn with the sketch groups out there, and it is just. It's like these are my people. This is where I belong. I finally feel like I'm not the weird one. Everybody else is here is just like me. Especially it's in San Diego, working at SeaWorld. It was the first time where I didn't feel like a freak. It was like, wow, these are my family. I feel like I belong somewhere finally. It was pretty amazing.
It's great. All right, well, thank you so much for spending time with me and for sharing your advice with everyone. And I really hope everyone watching, if you are not subscribed to Will Terrell, subscribe. He's awesome. He's freaking amazing. And you can just tell from this interview, great guy, great personality, great advice.
Oh, you're making me blush.
Yeah, so thank you, Will.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, Internet people.
Thanks for watching. Bye.